espionage by pottery. I mean, that's crazy.
Pottery and
Pottery and I mean, yeah, it could happen.
And it's also just like really.
that story about.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go
No,
ahead.
no, no, you. I was gonna like circle back
I
to you and like Hawaii, just like.
Well, just a quick comment. It's really a story. Like, so the story that I learned about the stealing of the Zia symbol, is still pretty fresh to me because of moving to New Mexico in 2012 and starting grad school as a Kanaka Maile grad student and learning about the history of various forms of colonialism and the way that capital worked specifically in what is now called New Mexico. And so, like, one of the things I loved to do when I taught, and I first started teaching in communication and journalism department, and then I moved later to American studies, but I would teach a class that was usually like a kind of cultural studies, like let's do media studies and representation stuff. And I would just dunk on people that would get tattoos of symbols that were like native symbols. So like in Hawaii, this is a huge issue, right? And so one of the favorite things I like to dunk on is people that are trying to get not tribal tattoos, because who knows what that means, but to get the Hawaiian Islands like across their chest. And it's like they're not even from the Hawaiian Islands. Or when you see somebody with a tattoo of the Hawaiian Islands, but it's missing one of the islands, like, come on. But the other thing I like to dunk on in New Mexico is people who had Zia tattoos. And it just so happened the day I was doing this in class in a lecture, there was a student of mine who had a tank top on, and I'm like just talking a bunch of shit basically, and with like expert research and like interesting thoughts, but nevertheless talking shit. And my class starts to laugh, and this one student's face is just blush red, and it's, of course, this like white queer student of mine. And I realize at the end of class when he leaves, he has a big old Zia tattoo on his like left or right shoulder. And so then I was like, that's funny. And then just for context, in another class, he was trying to claim that it's racist that Native students get scholarships. And there I was, like a Native student teaching him with like a scholarship. And he leaves that class. So he was like, a interesting person. But the last thing I'll say is one time I was at a Sidewinders, and he bought me a drink, and I was like, yup. Full circle.
Right. Let's go.
That's great.
Oh my goodness. I bet he stopped wearing tank tops.
At least to your class.
That's silly as hell. Yeah, it's it's really something. But yeah, oh god, I lost my train of thought. I had something in the queue, but
I was at UNM when I first read Huanani-Kay Trask book, and I grew up in Ogapoge. I grew up in the heart of the consumerism of Native people and the art, and it was interesting because I wasn't at a stage in my evolution at that point in my life where I recognized it here with my own community. But when I read about Hawaii and what she had to say about Hawaii, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And when you're younger and you talk about traveling, or you have friends that travel and regularly go to places, in Hawaii it was always sort of the ideal, like if you were going to go on vacation, and if you're watching game shows on TV and people want a vacation to Hawaii, it was like, oh man, that is so cool. And I must have been 23, 24, something like that. And I Hawaii was one of those places I always thought I would visit. After I read that book, I was like, nope, not ever going there, because I don't want to participate in the violence against the Indigenous people. But it really was a huge, huge impact on my life. And somebody needs to write something about northern New Mexico.
Yeah, that would be super cool. I mean, one of the things that I think a lot of us learned from Huanani-Kay Trask and the work and advocacy that she did was that she toured across North America, from what I understand, and gave talks at universities and otherwise, and literally told people, do not come to Hawaii. On one hand, that's like a really serious stance, and on the other hand, it's a stance that was politically really important to make, and so I think that had a lot of really great ramifications for basically telling people who were going to come to Hawaii and be, shitty tourists and, like, as is now a technical term, fucking howles. And you can look up in the book by Judy Royer, Howles in Hawaii, that is a technical term. And it's her term, not mine. But yeah, you could come to Hawaii and do that. And, Huanani-Kay Trask said, don't. And I think that really resonated across even like progressive and radical folks hearing that, like you're saying, Elena. And at the same time, she was one for transnational coalition building. She was an internationalist, right? She was studying not just feminist theory in Madison, Wisconsin, but she was also studying revolutionary thought from Africa, right? She's one of the Hawaiian feminist nationalists that really introduced these radical African thinkers into the way we organized ourselves politically and in terms of movement building. So it's not that she was against movement or alliance building or travel, but a certain kind of travel, right? A certain kind of migration. And a lot of folks don't realize that she was actually talking about settler colonialism before Patrick Wolf was. She has this brilliant piece about settlers of color that I believe came out in the 90s, maybe late 80s, talking about like the hegemony of immigrants who settled in Hawaii that rose to political power, especially in the Democratic Party. And her family was intimately involved in sort of the development of the Democratic Party. So she saw it very closely. But she was talking about the way that migration, right, that form of travel and settlement, which we might say is still touring in a sense, right? It still participates in a kind of tourist route and travel that we see now, and we separate these categories between like who's a settler or who's a settler of color or who's a tourist. And I think we could problematize that. And I think Huanani-Kay Trask was problematizing that in a really important way. But at the same time, politically, I think that there are good ways to come to Hawaii. And I think that you and Melanie detailed some of those good ways of traveling and being in relation to people and place and the existence and social ecology of places in a good way. And it depends on protocols, right? And I think it was really great that Huanani-Kay Trask, her protocol for a large audience was don't come.